Incredible film, Colin. Such
Thank
powerful
you.
images of Buanoi in the cage in the zoo. I mean, it's unbelievable story. How did you first get involved with this? How did you hear about this issue?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to make it short. I've been working with an NGO called Freeland, and they're based in countries all around the world. There's office in Bangkok and Brazil and Kenya, and there happens to be one an hour or so away from where I live in the United States. And the founder of that organization, Steve Galster, is from the same home state as that I'm from. And I made a previous film to this, and Steve kind of connected me to those people. And then he also was like, "Hey, there's this story, and that's kind of been ongoing for years now about this gorilla," and told me about Sinjira. And so that's kind of the short of how I got the story. And when I had the means to do it, I ended up, flying to Thailand and making the film. Yeah.
Yeah, and is this happening anywhere else in the world, or I mean, Pata Zoo is on the seventh floor of a department store. It's just terrible.
Yeah, I think that it happens all over, really. I mean, it's a hard thing to trace, right? Um, my suspicion is that a lot of grade 8 trafficking goes to China, and it's just very hard to track it once it gets into China, right? But I mean, we've seen, like, in the past when Michael Jackson, for example, had his chimpanzee Bubbles, that there was a huge spur of trafficking that happened in the Middle East after that, because it was such a visible thing. And then people were like, "Oh, I want a baby chimpanzee," and that spurred a whole lot of trafficking from Africa. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you mentioned to me before when we spoke a few days ago the relevance of COVID and how the zoo's now been shut down, but it still goes on. What's the update?
Yeah. So, and if you read the last text card there, the Thai government had rejected the renewal for Patazoo's zoo license. So you would think when that happens, they're not able to operate. This was all kind of happening and going on when COVID was maybe 2-3 months in. So everything was at that point pretty uncertain. And we have not seen the animals been moved from the zoo to anywhere. I mean, there's Edwin Wick is one person who had built like a sanctuary for the majority of the animals. So, I mean, the spot for them to be moved to exists. There's a lot of debate and controversy about where Buanoi should go. I think everyone's kind of in agreement that Buanoi deserves to be with other gorillas, and that would be the best place. So she could be a mother. Like, I have this card right here from Sinjira that this
Oh
is
wow.
a little piece of art that she made. And I think, like, giving Buanoi the opportunity to be a mother would be the best ending for her, and one that she deserves after being in a concrete cell for 33 years. So in a lot of ways, COVID has really complicated um, this quite a bit. Um, it's hard to really, like, put it into like a tangible thing like this happened, but I do know that they are losing money, Pata Zoo, by not being able to be open. Um, I think it's an opportunity for them to really step up to the plate and say, "All right, we are gonna put these animals in a sanctuary and move Buanoi." But it's one of those things about losing face in Thailand is a very hard thing for Thai people. So we want to do it in a very careful way and make
Yeah.
sure that you know that Knit doesn't really lose face, and that's the owner, Knit. And So that's been another whole complicated layer to this as well, is understanding the Thai culture and really trying to make change in a positive way for everybody. And so, it's one of those things where you don't really want to hurt anybody in the process, but you still want to continue to put pressure on this place because they're still doing what they're doing. I'm almost certain that they're still trafficking animals. When I went there and I visited, there was a bonobo there that hadn't been there before. And if you're familiar with what a bonobo is, it's a highly endangered ape that's only found in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So when I had someone else visit there a couple months prior, it wasn't there. So how in the world did you get a bonobo? So it's kind of like, this is still going on. And as the film came out too, I've heard all sorts of crazy stories about Pata Zoo. I heard one story about them having a polar bear at one point.
Wow.
I mean, that was obviously a long time ago. And nobody really, it's hard to corroborate that story, but there's no way the polar bear could have survived up there. So
do you think a lot of pressure has come from coronavirus? Most people, or common knowledge now almost, is that it came from captive animals in the first place. Do you think there's been a bit of pressure because of that around the world to stop having all these animals in captivity?
I think so. Yeah. And it's, if you start to do a little bit of research just on the surface of the internet even, and where these different zoonotic diseases come from and how they get transferred to humans, it's pretty clear cut what's happening. This has happened in a variety of different ways around the world. This just happens to be one that's much more viral than most. And so I think if we start to put a little bit more emphasis on that and realize, how dangerous this can be when we clash with animals and the trafficking of especially highly endangered animals, then we're starting to realize that there's a much larger impact on certain populations around the world, or us as a whole, right? So I think that answered your question maybe a little bit.
Yeah. I'm interested about the story, what happened to the other gorilla that was in the zoo, King Kong.
King Kong died at Pata Zoo.
In captivity, yeah.
In captivity, yes. So that was, I want to say maybe 10 years ago. And I wouldn't say that's for sure. It's kind of like an odd timeline. And what ended up happening too, even after I published this film last year, we figured out exactly kind of who the traffickers were. And then we had to redo a part of the film. So I feel like there's just new parts of the story coming in constantly. And it's King Kong. There isn't much pictures of him out there. And, but it was a male Western lowland gorilla, I believe. Yes.
Yeah. And this isn't your first Stolen Apes short film. Is that correct? You started with another one somewhere else.
Yes. And this was another story that Freeland plugged me into. And I had recently, or I think it was 2 years ago now, 3 years ago, I had saw a story in the New York Times, and then Freeland was able to connect me with a few different people. And I realized that there wasn't many people making cinema verite films about great ape trafficking in an independent way, right? There's a lot of stuff going on with BBC and different outlets, but they don't really seem to, or didn't seem to capture the stolen ape trade in a global way. And so I made a film. The first film was called just Stolen Apes, and that was based in Kenya and Thailand. And it's based around the operations of Daniel Stiles and his work at the Sweetwater's Chimpanzee Sanctuary at the Opejita Sanctuary in Kenya. And I made that film, and then I'm starting to make a series of short films about great ape trafficking and kind of the damage that it does to communities and to the apes themselves. So I'm on my third and fourth film right now of the series. One's going to be an animation called Stolen Apes Pongo, which is made in collaboration with the Wilds Project at Lancaster University. And then the fourth film is a continuation, hopefully, of when Buanoi gets moved to a sanctuary or a new location, and the closure of Pata Zoo. That one's kind of ongoing and fluid, of course, but yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah. So on that note, you also mentioned Cher has been quite heavily involved, the singer Cher, in petitioning for the release of Buanoi. What's the update with that? We couldn't get her on live with us, unfortunately. We've got Colin.
No, I wish we could. I feel pretty fortunate to have her kind of like start helping on the film. She has her own nonprofit called Free the Wild, and she has been successful. And the big one was saving an elephant in Pakistan called Kavan. And I actually just saw something on Twitter this morning that the full story is going to be out on Paramount Plus on Earth Day. So I'm really excited to see that. And so what ended up happening is they had all this success with Kavan, and they wanted to kind of rally that success and keep their momentum going with saving different animals. And they got wind of the film that we made about Buanoi, and Cher tweeted the film a couple times and has said that she's going to visit Buanoi once travel restrictions are lifted and she's able to go do that safely. So I think, just waiting around for that and hopefully being able to film that at one point is going to be something that we're all really excited about and could really truly have a larger impact than any of the things that we've done so far from our team. And our team is, just much more than me. There's probably 10 of us, including Steve Galster, Freeland, and Sinjira, Daniel Stiles, and photographers and animal rights activists, all trying to shut down this shopping mall zoo.
Yeah. And the lady in the film is incredible as well. What's the general thoughts in Thailand towards stuff like this happening with Thai people?
Yeah, I think that's one part of our outreach and engagement plan that could be beefed up quite a bit. I think there's a group of Thai people that really agree with what's going on, and they like seeing the animals, and they like going to see these orangutan shows, which really isn't touched much on in Stolen Apes Buanoi, but it is touched upon in Stolen Apes, my first film. So there is a desire to see these wild, exotic animals and see them kind of in this weird environment of different shows and things like that, or just seeing the animal in general. And then you have, on the other hand, people like Sinjira, who is a Buddhist nun and believes that these animals are extremely sacred and that they should be treated with the most up respect. So it's kind of, and I don't know if this is true. It's hard for me to really wrap my head around Thai culture. And I feel like I'm always kind of making mistakes when I'm, interacting with Thai people. But it could be that disconnect with religion, right? Is that people are not seeing the value and the religious value from Buddhism in these animals, right? And that's where kind of a disconnect is happening. And, the lack of education, as Sinjira says in the film, education is key. And we need to educate our new generations, especially. But, in the end, I'm feeling pretty hopeful because when we're talking about injustice, anywhere, anywhere in the world at this point. I think we're starting to get to a point where all of the injustice that we're seeing is becoming much more visible, through camera phones, through filmmakers, through all sorts of different outlets. So I'm feeling pretty hopeful that by having these new tools, we're able to expose injustice, show it to these new generations. And as these people get older and they start to develop into, roles in government and, prominent different roles in society, even, that we're able to influence and kind of have nature rebound in a really, really positive way, and also prevent things like COVID-19 from happening. Um, so I'm feeling hopeful about that. And that's one thing that I try to always do with the films that I make, is have films that provide hope. Because some of this
Yeah.
some of the stuff that we hit on is like, she's been there for 33 years, and it's just kind of disgusting in a lot of ways.
I know. I mean, some people have 33 years, and we can all know what that's like at the minute. We've gone mad just spending. Well, we've almost just passed our year anniversary of lockdown over here in the UK. You mentioned a bit of hostility in the film with with the filmmaking. What was it like actually physically filming the film? Did you have to do a lot of undercover shots or things like that, or did you get permission from anyone?
I did not. I was on a work permit when I went there through Freeland. They have an office there, and so I was legally there, doing this. I've heard a few different stories about tourists getting beat up and things like that from taking too much pictures and videos, and being asked to stop recording and things like that. Um, I think that it's one of those things where you just kind of have to go and do it, and kind of put on your, like, that you are a tourist, right?
Mm.
Which, made me a little bit nervous in a lot of different ways. I'm not exactly someone who blends in Thailand.
No,
Six three, blue eyes, red hair, so I kind of stick out quite a bit. But at the end of the day, it didn't. I just went and did it, and then that was it. I think
yeah.
that it did scare me in a couple different ways, but I think if you're a filmmaker and you're doing something that doesn't scare you, then you might be doing something wrong. I think that a lot
Yeah.
of filmmaking,
If you're doing something and you're not going to get arrested, then you also might be doing something wrong as well. That seems to be the theme nowadays.
yeah,
You touched on it briefly, but with the success of this film, if Buanoi does get released, and there's still a bit up in the air where she ends up going, with great apes and gorillas in general, what is the hope of them integrating back into the wild? Because I know with a lot of animals, with some animals it's fine, with some animals it's completely impossible. So
yeah. Unfortunately, Buanoi will never be able to go back into the wild. Um, it's just not going to be possible. And I'm not exactly an expert on reintegrating gorillas or great apes. I do know that it's something that's extremely, extremely hard to do. And you have to catch them kind of like at the right phase. And for the most part, it just never ends up working, because a lot of the ways that these apes are obtained is you go into a group of apes, right? And someone shoots and kills all of the adults and then takes the babies, right? That is not something that that does well with the baby, right? So the baby is traumatized and really doesn't really know what's going on. And so if you think about that trauma and carrying that forward and then being ripped out of the mother's arms and ripped out of the ecosystem, there's no way for that ape to really learn how to be an ape.
Yeah.
You can go and put them in, whatever situation you want. I mean, best case scenario, you're going into an accredited zoo or sanctuary, but still at that same time, I think that it's something that I haven't really seen much success with. Being reintegrated into a group that's in a sanctuary or a zoo is kind of the best case scenario, and that, in Buanoi's case, hopefully becoming a mother and having another gorilla be on Earth, I think that would be your best situation.
Yeah.
But as far as like surviving by themselves in the wild, I think those are far and few between.
What's the lifespan of these gorillas? So Buanoi's 33.
Hmm.
What's the lifespan?
They're about, I think, 40 to 50 years old,
Okay.
in the wild or so. And so in captivity, I think it's always a little bit longer because they're not exposed to the elements so much. I do think that, being alone could put a certain amount of stress
Yeah.
on an animal. And the other thing too about moving gorillas, there's a lot of controversy around it for a number of different reasons, because gorillas have one of the highest mortality rates when they're relocated. So there's a lot of worry there. They're a very stressed out animal. You can tell when they get scared in the wild and their troop, moves locations. They all defecate and they all run off, and they're like highly sensitive animal. So moving Buanoi has worries a lot of people, and I think it worries the owner too. And he knows that, he knows what's going on. I think he just has trouble letting go of the money and this special unique thing, of course, but also there's a good chance that she could die going to wherever she is. And I don't know how to facilitate that relocation personally. And I know that there's going to be a lot of experts talking about that when the time comes, but definitely something that worries pretty much everyone involved.
Yeah. It's an incredible story. We'll open it up to some questions now. If anyone wants to type out any questions for Colin regarding this. You mentioned the zoo is partially closed. What's happened to all the other animals that are in the zoo?
It's hard to say. I
Yeah.
imagine they're just still sitting there.
And it's completely legal, the zoo being those conditions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a zoo law that's in place, or I do know there was some sort of legislation that they put in place. I don't understand that specifically, but I do know that Pata Zoo was open before any of that legislation was put into place. Another thing about this too is, we were gaining a lot of traction with the Thai government, and then the Thai government, the power changed, and there was different people, in different positions that kind of set us back as well. But I think you can. I do know Sinjira went and visited Buanoi once during the pandemic, I believe, and I think she was able to get in, if I recall correctly. But yeah, as far as all the other animals, they're sitting there. I mean, Edwin Wick, who has a sanctuary in Thailand, has created an entire sanctuary for all these animals, and has been, during 2020. I think he did a giant fundraiser where he locked himself inside of a cage for a week to kind of pay for a lot of it. And he seems to be doing really great work. And so I don't know why those animals are still there. I think corruption always, plays a key role in preventing things like this from happening. But we're not giving up, and we're continuing to put pressure on everything. And I think we're just waiting for this COVID-19 pandemic to kind of get to a point where I can, or we can, like get share there and have some international press to really push things forward, right?
Yeah, well, it seems like you're almost there, to be optimistic. Yeah, it's an incredible film. There's one question from Kurt. How can we see the other Stolen Apes film?
Yeah, so all of my films are on Vimeo and YouTube at the moment. So you can check that out. They're also on woodgrainmedia.com. And you can go there for all the information regarding these films. And you could also follow at Stolen Apes. We're pretty active on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And that would be... yeah, and then we have another question from Charlie. So, what do I think is key in dismantling this kind of illegal animal trade?
Good question.
Yeah, I think it's understanding the demand, right? Like, and if there wasn't like a demand for it, then it wouldn't be fueled by it, right? Because when a little kid in the Middle East says, "I want a chimpanzee," a baby chimpanzee, then that family who's going to get their kid a chimpanzee is going to figure out how to finance the murder of all these other chimpanzees for the baby, right? So once we figure out that demand and how to reverse that culture of saying no, this is wrong, that's going to be, I think, something that really will put a damper on the illegal trade. And I think it's different for each animal as well. I mean, we see all sorts of different trafficked animals for different reasons. Chimpanzees, for the baby and playing around with the baby as it's a little human. If you look at a pangolin, you're talking about its scales, or the horn of a rhino, and a lot of those different unique animal parts are used in the traditional pharmacopoeia of the traditional Chinese medicine. I mean, the pharmacopoeia of traditional Chinese medicine. And so once you start to reverse and debunk those myths and saying that this won't work as far as medicine, or you can't have a baby chimpanzee, and reversing that culture and that mindset, I think then you're taking the demand away. And so, and like I said, I think it's different with all sorts of different animals around the world. So kind of,
I mean,
understand. Yeah, go ahead.
We kind of had that before in London. There's this famous story of Cecil the lion, I think it's called. It's being sold in Harrods. I mean, you used to be able to buy lions and tigers and all sorts of animals in Harrods. So I guess there might be a case of other parts of the world catching up with the Western world, because we were doing that before. But largely, I guess, education in terms of stopping the demand. Do you think?
Yeah, it's an ongoing process for sure.
Another question here.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a lot of ways we are. And I think it's one of those things where, especially sanctuaries, like I've thought in my mind a lot about this, and sanctuaries and how they do public outreach, right? And zoos, and how they advertise, and how that contributes to more trafficking, right? And it's a really hard thing to trace in a lot of ways. But when you have a sanctuary that's an accredited sanctuary, and they're showing their baby chimpanzee or whatever they have, and they're not really putting it into context of like why they have that baby or what they're doing, I think it can hurt in a lot of ways. And then a lot of these videos too, they just get reposted on the internet without any context whatsoever, and it's like, look at this baby ape, look how cute this is, right? And then that ends up just fueling more and more and more. So I think in the end, like Instagram, especially, ends up becoming a really bad tool.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I felt like a hypocrite myself in a lot of ways too, because when I'm there looking at these apes, I'm like, oh, like I want to get a picture, I want to show the picture, I want to do this. And I look at all of the different animals that we have, especially here in the United States. I mean, the big one that everyone talks about, obviously, are tigers.
Yeah.
And I think that we need some outstanding courage from people that are in power to really put an end to this. And it doesn't just take them, it takes a whole group of people. And I feel like, or I'm hoping at least, that this COVID-19 pandemic is beginning to have people see that clashing with animals, eating animals, can end very, very badly. And then if you wrap all that into climate change and what's going to be happening once we exceed our carbon load in the next, whatever it is, 7, 15 years, however we continue to react to this, we could see some very detrimental things happening. So to answer your question, I think, yeah, in a lot of ways we are hypocrites. And,
This
I don't, oh, go ahead.
this next question kind of, sorry, follows on from what you were saying regarding the social media.
Yeah, I think, like we were just talking about before, I think social media is in a lot of ways positive, in a lot of ways hurts animals. Because it ends up being this worldwide tool for people to post an image, right, of something happening, and then someone will repost it in their own context, right? And that will have a huge negative effect, right? Because if I'm a sanctuary, for example, or a zoo, or just a person, and I post an image of a chimpanzee, a baby chimpanzee, and I say this chimpanzee was trafficked, its mother was murdered, and the chimpanzee was ripped from the arms, right? I give the context to the story, but then someone from the Middle East just reposts it, puts a fake pair of sunglasses on and goes, this is my homie, right? And their whole network sees that, right? Then it spurs the want for that, right?
Mm.
And also, a lot of these great ape traders, they have social media accounts, especially on Instagram, where they're actually posting pictures of animals for sale, and you can contact them and try to buy them through there. Um, so social media, I think, can be super positive, but we have to stay on it and make sure that when we're seeing those specific pieces that are not right and they're not put in the correct context, that we're reporting them and they're being removed. So I think big tech, plays a huge part into this too. Facebook and Instagram need to crack down a lot more and understand what's going on. So I hope that answered your question,
Yeah,
James.
thank you. Going back just a little bit to if we're kind of hypocrites or not, do you think zoos in general, even if they're kept in seemingly good conditions, are a good tool for education, or do you think they've had their day and we should not have any animals in captivity anymore?
I think that's a hard question because the thing is that there is this demand for these, let's just say, chimpanzees, right? And so, what happens then once you catch your trafficker? Now you have this baby chimpanzee.
Mhm.
What do you do with it? It
Yeah,
can't go back into the wild. You're not just gonna kill it, right? You need There needs to be places like the Liberia Chimpanzee Rescue, for example, or Sweetwater's Chimpanzee Sanctuary. There needs to be places like that, and often those places have a huge investment into whatever it may be, you know. But I think a lot of it goes around to reduce trafficking, or they do, you know, they're funding conservation in some sort of way, right? So I think that to say that we can't have them anymore doesn't really make sense, because they need to exist. Otherwise, that the animals that are being trafficked and they're not going to survive. So they need to go somewhere. And I think that being an accredited zoo or sanctuary is the best place for them to be. But yeah, I mean, education is, you know, probably number one on the list, because if you're not being educated about why that animal is there, then you really shouldn't be seeing that animal at all. So
interesting take on it. I mean, you have the whole SeaWorld marine captivity, that kind of thing as well, which has obviously come to light very recently, but it's a little bit different. We could go on for that for a long time, I'm sure.
Yeah. And you know, it's not like one country is immune to this. I mean, lots of countries have incredible zoos and sanctuaries that are doing outstanding jobs. But, you know, as I see here in the United States all the time, I'll be driving somewhere in whatever state, and there will be a roadside zoo there, and they'll have an orangutan locked up in a, you know, in a small cage the size of this room. And you can't tell me that they got that, you know, from a situation where it wasn't trafficked, or someone sold it to them illegally, or whatever it may be. I mean, they're littered across the United States. I see them. I mean, Florida's got a ton of them, obviously.
Yeah. Texas, is it Texas has more tigers than anywhere else in the wild or something like that?
Yeah, the United States has more captive tigers than there are in the wild right now. So I think that's kind of one major fact that is pretty nuts, if you ask me. Yeah, it's pretty sad.
Very sad. Thanks everyone for your questions. If there's, just looking through them now, I don't think we've missed any out. If anyone else has any questions, please go ahead and ask. And if not, we'll leave it there, Colin, unless you have anything else that you'd like to add.
No, I think the only thing I try to always end on is hope, and, you know, remaining positive. I think that if we stay hopeful and we realize what we need to do, and then we apply it, that we can make the change that we want to see in the world. So I'll end on that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, thanks for joining us. Thank you everyone who's been watching as well, and for your questions, some really interesting questions. And yeah, congratulations, Colin, on the honorable mention in the documentary short category. I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival if you have time to tune in. Shouldn't be too much of a time difference for you guys over there, but yeah, thank you for joining us. And we will be back at 5 o'clock GMT for the Rising Tide of PPE, which explores plastic pollution with regards to masks and gloves. And we're joined live with the makers of that film and the founders of Beach Guardian as well at 5 o'clock. So thank you very much. We'll leave with Megan McFarlane. Together we